I started with a backyard filled with weeds, uneven ground, and 0 garden beds. Fast forward just 4 weeks, and roughly $875 later, and I've built the first terrace, planted my first bed, and uncovered something magical buried in the grass. Let me show you how I did it. If you're dreaming of turning your yard into a garden retreat, but don't know where to start, this week's video might provide you with a little bit of inspiration. Hi, I'm Sue from Garden Moxie. We just moved to Kentucky this summer, and I'm starting this garden from scratch. I'm now gardening in a Zone 6B, just a bit warmer than my old garden in southeast Michigan. This was the backyard we moved into. No beds, just some weeds, and a lot of unknowns. We're staying in a temporary home for 2 to 3 years while we build our forever house. And while we're determined to build a beautiful space, working on a budget is going to be key, as well as thinking ahead to see what types of plant material we might be able to take to our new home. So this week, I'm excited to show you how things look after 4 weeks and what's planned for the future. Unlike my southeast Michigan garden, which was flat as a pancake, this new space is sloped. So I decided to work with the slope instead of against it. And our plan is to split the garden into 3 main sections, or terraces. This way, each level can have its own space and feel like its own little garden room. I'm starting with the top level closest to the house, what I'm calling the first terrace. And that's been my main focus for the past few weeks. Before I could plant anything, I had to think about the structure. So the first thing that I purchased were 10 Oakland holly trees. I've talked about these trees in my previous video. I got these on a great sale on the Home Depot website. And my intent here is to use the holly trees to create the first terrace or the walls of the first terrace. Originally, I had the idea of planting the hollies in a straight line, making more of a formal layout. But the more that I looked at it, the more I realized that it made sense to really follow the curve of the hill. In order to help me figure out the best placement, or the placement that I liked the best for these holly trees, I kept them in the pots and kind of moved them around and placed them along the curve of the hill to figure out what really visually appealed the best to me. Once I was happy with the way that they looked, I dug those plants into the ground. The second part of the structure that I wanted to focus on for the first terrace area was to get some plant material that I could put around the deck to kind of hide the underneath part. And the plant that I decided to get was the Invincible Mini Mauvette hydrangea. I purchased 7 of these plants on the Home Depot website. The last bit of structure that I'm hoping to add to this first terrace area are patio blocks that connect the left-hand side yard to the right-hand side yard. So what I did to kind of brainstorm how that could look, or how that's gonna look, is I had lots of cardboard pieces left over from our move. So I cut them into smaller shapes. They're not the exact same size as the patio blocks, but I went ahead and placed them on the ground and tried to get an idea of eventually, when the patio blocks are down, how that is going to look and how the flow walking through from the one side yard to the other side yard is gonna work. One of the decorative elements that I like to have in my garden are wayside shrines. And I have a small little statue of St. Francis, and I needed to construct a new shrine for that statue. My idea was to recycle the old fence and use those fence parts to create a wayside shrine. There was some interest in how I was actually going to make this wayside shrine, so I'm going to include a quick little demonstration here in the video. Now, the point I want to make before we get going is I purposely am not worried about making this shrine perfectly perpendicular. This is supposed to be more of a folk art element for the garden. And so I'm using only hand tools. I realize that the cuts are not perfectly straight, but that is really part of the charm of the Wayside Shrine. I was able to find an old 2x6 that was laying in the garden, and I used that for the sides. I was able to pry off the fence pickets, the old fence pickets, and I used those pickets for the back portion of the Wayside Shrine. And I also used a picket as part of the decorative element on the top. In order to attach all of these things together, I used a set of wood screws. You can get these screws at any local hardware center. I used a simple handsaw to cut through the fence. I am really happy with how this little shrine turned out. And I love the idea of being able to recycle materials that were already here in the garden at no cost at all. And now I've got a little element, a little decorative element that I can add that helps to start making the garden my own. I also had a surprise discovery in the garden this week. There's been a big hunk of cement in the back garden, and quite honestly, in Michigan we don't really have poisonous snakes, and I am a little bit apprehensive about the fact that there's copperheads here in Kentucky. So I've been avoiding picking up this piece of concrete that's been in the back of the garden. And we also noticed that there was, the base part of a bird bath. So the other week, I finally got up my courage and got my shovel and picked up that cement piece. And lo and behold, I found out that this was actually the top part of the bird bath. And it was a great surprise. So when I flipped it over, I was able to see that it's actually a little Celtic design. I got a scrub brush, cleaned up the bird bath, and I've got it now filled with water in the garden. At first, when I first put water in the bird bath, there was a little robin, but he hasn't come near that bird bath since. I think he's a little bit skeptical. But how fun it was to uncover that in basically a pile of weeds. This week, my husband and I also took a trip to a local garden center, and it was a blast. I was able to find quite a few new plants for this small little area, this first terrace of the garden. We decided we wanted to just get a few pollinator-friendly plants into the ground. Clearly, this border needs still to be widened, and it needs a lot more plants. But when we went to the garden center, we decided, you know what, let's start building a pollinator garden. That's what we're planning for the first terrace. So let's do a quick review of the budget spent so far. I spent $344.40 to purchase 10 Oakland holly trees. I spent $184.61 to purchase 7 Invincible hydrangeas. I bought 6 bags of compost, costing a total of $30. I also spent roughly $300 for plants at a local garden center and $15 for coneflowers at the local Lowe's. That brings our gardening budget total to $874.01. So this is where the new garden started, and this is where the garden stands after 4 weeks. There's lots more to do, and I hope you'll join me. If you're just getting started, know this: sometimes the hardest part of a project is just to begin. So pick a small space, get going, and just whittle away as you can. So let me know in the comments what you're working on in your garden this week. That's it for this video, friends. I'll see you in the next one.